I did not want to take this job. Coming back after dealing with a particularly nasty daitya in Raipur, I was really looking forward to a break, something I hadn't had in over a year, when Guruji called me for another job. I knew this was going to be trouble as soon as I saw the video, and it only became worse when I realized I was dealing with a goddamn pishak. At some level, I felt sorry for the poor bastard sitting in front of me. Losing over half of your life in the span of a few days is not something anyone should go through. But while I did sympathize with him, I was not an emotional fool. I was pragmatic enough to understand that he would most likely die trying to take this monster down. Believe me, having this type of clarity in this line of work can mean the difference between your own life and death. So, while some of you may think that I'm an asshole, I don't care in the least bit, as long as my work is done. So why Ranchi then? He asked with a confused expression on his face. It makes the most sense, I replied. Of the 3 properties we traced to your sleep time, buddy, this was the most recent purchase. It's a farmhouse in the ass end of nowhere, a perfect hiding spot, and happens to be near the same city where you started your job. But we'll be hitting all 3? He asked, and I nodded. And we'll need you to go back to your house in Ranchi, I said. That way we'll make him go back to his base and hit him there. So I'm acting as bait? Again. He was offended, but also a little scared. Yes, I nodded. But you won't be sleeping this time, so rest assured you won't have to worry about losing any more years. Aditya didn't look convinced. That didn't surprise me at all. He didn't have a lot of years. One more slip, and the Pishach would suck the life right out of him. One more thing, I continued. Keep in mind that when we're raiding his hideout, you would be a threat to him, and not just food. He won't go easy on you this time. But he will avoid killing you, and that's something I won't hesitate to use to my advantage. He was going easy on me this whole time? He asked, mockingly, always with the sarcasm. Asshole. Well, you're about to find out, aren't you? I replied sweetly. Here, take this, I said, handing him a pill. What's this? He questioned. Modafinil, I replied. Take this at around 2 to 3 a.m. It'll keep you awake. A couple of hours later, Aditya left for Indore, from where he would take a flight to Ranchi, and I would follow him on the next plane. We wanted to give this illusion to the Pishach that our partnership had ended, and that Aditya was going back after having given up on trying to fight. Who knows how effective our little ruse will be. We had to take that chance, though. If there was even the slightest possibility that it would improve our chances, we had to do it. Besides, I had a couple of things to take care of in the meantime. I made some phone calls and arranged for some weapons to be made available in Ranchi itself. Transporting guns from here would have taken too long and would be too risky with the government breathing down hard on the necks of any smugglers. I then arranged for some kidnappers and such from the surrounding area. Yes, you heard that right. Kidnappers, gangsters, etc. Our people regularly work with criminal elements and use them as meat shields against monsters. It keeps us safe, saves lives of innocent people, weakens the monsters, and cleans our streets at the same time. They are never told what exactly they're attacking, and most die in the process. Questionable from an ethical standpoint, especially if you are a communist, but highly efficient. The sky was a pale shade of blue when my plane landed in Ranchi. Delhi's poisonous smog had shifted east and made its way here, keeping visibility low. I was just glad that my flight hadn't been delayed. That would have been a big fucking problem. I had a light breakfast at the airport itself, and then took a cab to Aditya's house, where I found him right outside, looking exasperated as he tried to reason with the 30-odd men who were camped outside. He threw his hands up when he saw me. Who the fuck are all these people? He demanded. They wouldn't say anything at all. Friends, I replied. Friends? His brow furrowed in suspicion. I nodded and walked over to speak to my contact here. Aditya buzzed around me like an aging bee, pestering me with questions while I inspected my weapons. I held up a 9mm pistol. You know how to use this? I asked. Yes, he said. They taught us the basics at the academy. All right then, I said, looking at our little band. Let's go. It took us over an hour to reach the farmhouse, with Aditya staying silent the entire ride, probably contemplating his life and probable death. I was fine with that. The less distractions before a job, the better. The fog had cleared by the time we reached the Pishach's base, a quaint little farmhouse that could serve as a rich family's vacation home in happier times. Now it was hiding the worst sort of nightmares known to man. We parked our cars some distance from the building, trying to avoid being seen. I got out of the car, put the sling of my rifle around my shoulder, and went to speak to my contact, with Aditya staying on my heels. My contact, a man named Lucky here, was much like me, early 20s, with a tattoo of the trident and crescent on his forehead. "We're ready," I told him. "Send them in." He nodded and barked some orders at the low-life criminals who set off running towards the house, armed with their .303s. Lucky then came jogging back and shook my hand. "All yours now," he said. "I'm off." And with that he got in his car and left. "Wait," Aditya said. "Won't we need that car? How are we going to fit that many people in the other cars?" I didn't say anything and continued to focus on the farmhouse. They were at the front door now, and my heart was starting race. It would start any second now. "Oh no." Aditya spoke from beside me. "You don't expect them to make it out of this alive, do you? Holy shit." I shushed him, and we waited in silence as our team entered the building. A couple of tense minutes passed, and nothing happened as our criminal friends searched the building. Maybe we were wrong. Maybe our plan didn't work, and the Pishach was smarter than we thought and chose not to take the bait. If not here, I hoped he was at the other two sites, because if not, I had no idea how to proceed from there on. Would we have to ask Aditya to sleep again? Then what? Attack him the moment he comes to feed? Too risky. Luckily, my chain of thoughts were cut off by loud, painful screaming coming from inside the farmhouse. "Oh shit," Aditya whispered nervously. My hunch was correct. That arrogant bastard was here. He probably thought he could take us all out at his home turf. Gunshots followed as the criminals started to battle the Pishach. I imagined they were in for a heck of a surprise. They thought they were attacking some hapless middle-aged businessman and not a soul-sucking demon from hell. A loud explosion ripped through the air, shaking the earth as shards of glass broke out from one of the windows and bright orange flames leapt into the air, licking at the bright sunny sky. More screaming followed. "All right," I said, tapping Aditya on his arm. "Let's go." "Are you fucking crazy?" He looked at me wide-eyed. "You want to go into the middle of all that?" I began moving towards the building, keeling my gun on my shoulder and a finger next to the trigger. I heard Aditya shuffling behind me, and in seconds he was close to me. "You think they got him?" he whispered. I didn't give him an answer, and I don't think he expected one either. We saw one of the criminals come tumbling outside, covered in blood, looking shell-shocked. The next second, he was pulled back inside with terrifying speed, and Aditya yelped from behind me. "I thought it'd be weaker in the day," he whispered. "Shut the fuck up." I admonished him. "Sorry, I talk when I'm nervous," he blabbered. "Shut up anyway," I repeated. I told him that thing has no weaknesses. Should have paid attention in class. A terrifying silence had descended on the area by the time we reached the door, our breathing and the slight crunch of the gravel underneath our shoes being the only sound we could hear. I began sweating. Surely they couldn't have been taken out this quickly. Had I underestimated his strength? Regardless, we had come too far to turn back now. I slowly walked inside the open door and took in my surroundings. Bullet holes in the walls, blood splattered everywhere, tables and chairs thrown around, and heat coming in waves from one of the rooms in the back that had witnessed an explosion. The house looked like a war zone. But the most disturbing thing here were the bodies. It was a ghastly scene with limbs strewn here and there and the stench of burnt flesh heavy in the air. I walked straight ahead, carefully clearing every room one after the other, but found no sign of the Pishach. I was wondering where he had run off to when I heard Aditya calling for me. "Hey, check this out." His voice was coming from back in the living room. "One of them is alive. Impossible." I had just come from there and hadn't seen any sign of movement. I quickly made my way back and found him hunched over one of the wounded criminals, who was twitching wildly. "Step back, Aditya," I warned him. "You're too close." Before he could move away, the wounded man snarled and bit Aditya's left hand with all his might, making him scream. I tried to get a shot off, but didn't have a clear line of sight, so I moved in closer. Aditya's screaming got louder as the man bit harder, drawing blood and piercing flesh. There was a sickening crunch as he bit so hard that Aditya's bones shattered, making me afraid that he would pass out. The man shook his head wildly like a starving dog with a juicy bone, trying to bite the hand clean off, and it looked like he was succeeding. I moved in, took out my pistol, and shot the rabid monster in the head. Once, twice. But he held on with unnatural strength, refusing to let go. Aditya's hand now hung loosely from his wrist, and he screamed even harder. Not knowing what else to do, I took out my knife and swung it with all of my might, slicing Aditya's hand clean off, and then shoved him aside before emptying my gun inside the monster's head. That thing finally stopped moving, and I sighed in relief. I quickly moved over to Aditya's side and cauterized his wound. It was a miracle he was still conscious. What a tough bastard. He was wincing in pain, but seemed otherwise fine. I made him sit on one of the many bullet-riddled chairs. After that, I picked up a shotgun lying on the floor and went around destroying the brains of the criminals lying dead at various places around the house. I wasn't going to give the Pishach another chance at pulling something like this again. Aditya had tied a belt around his stump by the time I circled back to him. Like I said, tough. I was getting impressed with him. "You find him?" he asked, his teeth gritting in rage and pain. I shook my head. I had searched every nook and cranny of this place, but he wasn't here. There was only one place he could be. "There must be a basement or something," Aditya suggested. "There is a trap door outside the kitchen. It's the only place I haven't looked," I said. "Okay," he grunted. "Let's go." "You okay? You still want to come?" I asked. His eyes hardened, and I knew that was the only answer I was going to get from him. I wrenched the trapdoor open and saw that a rickety old ladder led down a dimly lit path. At least it wasn't completely dark, I mused, as I began my descent. After reaching the tiled floor, I helped Aditya climb down as well. This is it, I thought, the final stage. The basement was big, much bigger than I expected. Its total floor area must have been more than the house it was sitting under. "Whoa," Aditya whispered, as he took in the sight in front of him. Rows upon rows of hospital beds lay in front of us, being illuminated by lamps hanging over them intermittently. On these beds were the shriveled-up husks of the Pishach's past victims that he was forcibly keeling alive to feed off of. I don't know how much energy they gave him, but they certainly made for a disturbing sight with tubes sticking out of their decaying bodies. If we destroyed these, it'll be pretty much game over. "Do you think my Nani is here too?" Aditya asked. I looked at him. Tears were running down his tired face. "Listen," I said. "You can't empathize with these people. They aren't alive, you understand? This isn't even euthanasia. Euthanasia might have gray areas, but this doesn't." He nodded. I brought up my rifle and began killing those who had been tortured by this thing for possibly hundreds of years. The muzzle of my gun flashed as more and more of his food supply was erased. I stopped when I heard a furious growling. "Where is he?" Aditya asked. "Where are you?" he shouted. I heard rustling from above us and looked up and saw a pair of shining eyes gazing down at me from the darkness above. I pulled the trigger, but my bullet sailed harmlessly through his body and smashed into the ceiling as he leapt down at me and began slashing away with his vicious claws, slicing away huge chunks of my flesh. I tried to fight him off, but he was even stronger than I was, and I was slowly losing. He bit a chunk off my shoulder when Aditya wobbled over, aiming a solid kick at the ribs of this fucker, but his leg just passed through the Pishach's body, and he slipped, falling hard on his ass. The Pishach snarled and growled and made his way over to his favorite meal, giving me some time to breathe. I was losing far too much blood, far too quickly. We needed to end this fast. I tried to get up, but my head began to swim and I fell down to the floor. My vision became blurry, and I started blinking furiously to clear it. I heard a loud thunk, and with my hazy vision, saw that Aditya had been struck on the head with some sort of blunt object and was now knocked out. The Pishach was hunched over him, preparing to suck the life out of him. Fuck. If he succeeds, he'll regain whatever energy we had worked so hard to drain from him, and I would most certainly die here. There was only one thing I could do in this situation. With trembling hands, I searched for my pistol. The Pishach began to suck. I really needed to fucking hurry. My heart jumped in jubilation as my hand fell on my gun. Yes, I can still do this. I took that gun and aimed it at Aditya's head. My vision was still hazy. My hands were trembling. I was terrified that AI would miss. If I didn't land a perfect hit, that Pishach would come over to finish me off and then go back to its meal. Taking a deep breath, I pulled the trigger. The shot rang so loudly my ears began to ring, but I knew that I had connected because the Pishach screamed in murderous rage. It was not over. I might have stopped him from rejuvenating himself, but I still hadn't taken him down. He turned his wrathful gaze at me and walked over towards me, fully intent on finishing me off. I aimed the gun at him and pulled the trigger. My heart sank as the gun clicked, but no bullet shot out. This is it. This is how I was going to die. Doing a job I didn't want to take with no one in this world to mourn my death. But I wasn't going out without a struggle. That just wasn't who I was. I began to fight him off with everything I had, even though I knew I was going to lose. I don't really know whether it was my bullet that woke him up or it was just his insane willpower. At the time that I thought I had killed Aditya, my bullet had merely hit him on the arm from which I had separated a hand earlier. He got up on his feet and started to walk towards us, a baseball bat in his hand, while I continued to struggle against the Pishach. Aditya stood over us, took a deep breath, and swung the bat with all his fucking might. Our efforts at tiring the monster out finally succeeded as the bat connected with a satisfying crunch. Aditya didn't stop. He continued to swing his mighty hammer of death again and again and again, until the Pishach's head was nothing but a gooey mess. Aditya wobbled on his feet, but steadied himself and then bent towards me. I thought he was going to help me up. He picked up my rifle, aimed it at the Pishach's body, and emptied the clip one bullet at a time. He then began kicking that thing's body, pushing himself beyond the point of exhaustion. Stop. I coughed. It's over. He's dead. 20 minutes later, Aditya was sitting on the hood of my car, beaten, shot, mutilated, but still somehow conscious, while I lifted his grandmother's body into the trunk. His face was even more worn now. He easily looked like he was in his late 50s. So what are you going to do with him? He asked, pointing at the rucksack containing the remains of the Pishach. Burn it, I replied. Then bury the ashes under a ton of cement. He nodded. He looked old, but relieved, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders, which it of course had. How are you perfectly fine? He asked. I saw you. He hurt you worse than me, and yet, here you are, walking around like nothing happened. I didn't say anything. How did you cauterize my wound? He asked, pointing to his stump. Sure. Keep your fucking secrets, he muttered. Tried to kill me, but won't even tell me the truth. So what are you going to do now? I asked. Go back to your old life? He shook his head. I can't. There's no way to reasonably explain this. Late onset of progeria, I suggested. He laughed bitterly. No, he said. I can't let my parents see me like this. No parent should have to watch a child die, least of all in this manner. I need a clean break. An idea began to form in my head. Hey, I said, why not come work with us? Seriously? He laughed. My body can't handle any more of this. Not field work, I corrected him. We need help with the office. Administrative work. We'll give you a new identity and give your old self a clean death. Hope began to form in his eyes. You don't have to say yes now, I assured him. Think about it while you recuperate. We both turned out heads as we saw a car approaching us. It was an ambulance owned by someone our people had helped in the past. Thank God, I said. I really need to rest. He nodded. Can't wait to be in a bed, I added. Fuck that, Aditya exclaimed. I'm never going anywhere near a bed again for the rest of my life, however short it might be. And with that, we both began to laugh.